Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. Really appreciate your time and taking some time out of your day to join us and chat around Surface Modern Workshop. Um, Get things kicked off here. Essentially, oh, hearing some background noise, so we can mute there. Thank you. um, so in terms of content we're covering today, this is a Microsoft sort of facilitated content and session. You can see on here the agenda items of sort of the key points we're going to try and cover off today. Um, I've narrowed down from the content library, probably somewhat 500 odd slides down to a select group that I thought would be most relevant for you. What I did want to mention at the start, though, we're more than happy to take this modern workshop to any of you, to any of your locations to have a deeper dive conversation. So if there's areas that I don't cover today that you're interested in, by all means, reach out to your account manager or to our marketing team on the call here. We could always set up a custom tailored session just for you folks. And Microsoft helps provide us the support to do that type of activity. So more than happy to do that. And with that, I'll dive into the content here. So just kind of as a preface, as getting things going, I mean, none of this is really new to any of us. We kind of entered the next phase of the new normal, or the terrible saying we started hearing during the pandemic. First it was most of us, we all worked in an office place. Pandemic hits, most of us all work from home, with the odd exception of who needed to be in an office place, right? The continual dialogue that I'm having with clients now, everybody's half figured out, trying things all around hybrid work, which is really, the unanimous feedback seems to be, while many orgs have come back in a big way, not everybody's coming back into the office place. That creates a different environment than we had in the middle of the pandemic, where 99% of staff might have been remote. And really, what it's showing is some of the things that were maybe band-aid solutions in the middle of the pandemic have shifted. They're gonna keep sticking around. They're not going anywhere. So in terms of the talk track here, that's really introducing complexity into our environments. It's not like it was just for the pandemic. Everybody worked from home and we brought our gear home, and now we're back in the workplace with all of that same equipment. A lot of us helped users get set up with docking stations, monitors, equipment at home to connect their work PCs. As we go to hybrid work, now we have a need for many organizations to have that same setup in the office place as well, that they can bring their devices to. So, if it's not that, it's the introduction of more personal devices because, well, that's what's plugged in with a nice big monitor at their home office. We really created complexity, security challenges tied to that around what, the traditional corporate network used to look like. On top of that, for some staff that we may have hired during COVID, I know Microserve is a great example. I've got coast-to-coast staff now within Microserve, within my teams. So we now have that need to provision and deploy devices regardless of where they might be physically. We can't say, hey, can you just come to the Microserve Burnaby office here? We'll get you set up on day one, and then you can take your machine home like we used to. Those days have really shifted. We need to be able to provision, deploy those devices, ship them off. One of my latest hires was in Halifax or Saskatoon, for example. So we're really spread out more than we might have ever been before. The third point around scaling, bringing services to market doesn't apply for all of you folks. I know we've got municipalities and higher ed, all sorts of folks on the line today. I think the unanimous theme, though, is really around cost reduction. How do we get more efficient? How do we not keep spending money on the things that we have been in the past? And some of what I'd like to show you today around the manageability aspects really talk around the reduction in cost. At the same time, when you think employee experience, this is a really important aspect. If you are working from home, the device you're on, the quality of that device, how you connect back if all your colleagues might be in the office that day. How do we collaborate and kind of create and foster the combination of hybrid work where maybe half the team's sitting in the boardroom, the other ones are at home. They need to all have a seat at that table regardless of their location. So the device they actually have in front of them really does matter towards that ability to collaborate and do some of those things. And then lastly, obviously, cyber threats continue to grow. Not a shocker to anybody here. It's just our new way of life of thinking about everything we do. Um, we need to have trust around not only the user identity, that's what many orgs have gotten very good at in the past couple of years, but protecting the apps and then specifically the devices. And that world, thanks to this whole shift of provisioning and how and where it happens, has really changed. So it's not like it used to be. And we really need to evolve that technology. Not everybody has yet. So, my view, this slide hit home. It's a Microsoft slide, but that message around a modern device strategy is essential. I very much believe that. I've been talking about this pre-pandemic all the way through now. The device we have and how we manage those devices needs to evolve if it hasn't yet. In terms of our new way of working, our new sort of hybrid landscape. Great if we're all in the office and back to our typical security boundaries. But that whole idea around zero trust security, how do I continuously authenticate, make sure that that device is still okay? Just because I imaged it a year and a half ago doesn't mean that it's good today. All of that type of reality. And the employee standpoint really means it is about giving them something they can be productive on at day one. Make them excited to use the device and come to work. We can't be stuck in the, well, it doesn't quite work right, and the sound sucks, all that type of stuff that might happen on a device in the past, right? So the center point, in my view, and obviously this is centered around, Microsoft Modern Workshop. Really the fundamental layer to all of it is Microsoft 365. Much of what I talk about today, though, the device could be interchangeable. I'm going to cover off some of the elements where Surface really kind of differentiates or stands out. However, the broader theme of how M365 collaboration tools, a lot of us have found, have really enabled us. I'm not saying that other companies can't achieve that, but from a complete sort of end-to-end integrated hardware software solution strategy, I think there really is something to this theme of where things have been going. From that innovation standpoint, the technology, which I'll show you on the next slide or two around the Surface hardware, but even around manageability and security, going deeper than some manufacturers have gone before. So, when I think why Surface, even a number of years ago, I was a bit of a naysayer. I don't know about this kickstand. First time I tried it, I hated it on the Surface Pro. I don't think I can use that. I made a switch a few months before the pandemic really came down on us, and said, what, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to use this device and see what it's all about. And before that, I had the fortune to actually get to go to Redmond and do a tour of where they design and engineer the Surface hardware. So I already knew some of the concepts behind their secret sauce to make these products good. But actually that experience, especially in the pandemic, really changed things for me in terms of experience and how it got used, and a lot of my day-to-day life as it morphed, and as it has still morphed. Some of the elements that we don't really think about in terms of product engineering and the device hardware that goes into it. One of the most interesting areas that I got to witness down in Redmond was, this group they call the Human Factors Group. And they start looking at all sorts of things that are well beyond the simple, what's the tech in it? What processor do I have? What hardware do we bundle up in a solution? You see all the categories below. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but inclusivity, ergonomics, the design in terms of the amount of thought and time that goes into the feeling of the pen that gets used on the touch screen of the device, making it try to simulator come as close as we can to pen on paper, for example. Even just the weight of a pen really makes a difference. And hearing from some of their experts that live in those spaces, it kind of opened my eyes to understanding the amount of energy that goes into just thinking about, the tactile sensations to different products, for example. This thing goes even further to the weirdest place I've ever gotten to visit, the quietest place on earth, theoretically, or at least it was at the time, where they have this chamber you go into. And I was fortunate enough to go in there, and they shut the door. There's about half a dozen of us in this tiny little room with giant foam sticking out of the walls. It's elevated and hovering off the ground. And there's not a single sound in that place, right? So when they shut that door, and they turn off the lights for a minute, the only things you hear is like your breathing, your heartbeat, everybody's gurgles in their stomachs, and it sounds loud because there's no other noise. There's no other acoustics coming through it. When you think of that in terms of device design, it's kind of cool to think about, what that means in terms of capturing the sounds that their own devices make. So that fan that spins and kicks in when the device warms up, for example, what does that sound like? If we know that sound profile, then we can hide that sound when the device is running, when you're in the middle of a meeting, for example. So seeing how they bring together a lot of that R&D knowledge and creating really what I like to think of as like the premium device. Service hardware is not designed to be cheap or that alone. It's really around a premium experience and showing you the best of the art of the possible when you combine the hardware and software technology together. Same thing, I'm not going to read all the points here. Not everybody loves the Surface Pro like I have come to really enjoy, especially while I'm on the road. The example here is actually the same machine that my wife has, the laptop with the rose gold color, built into it. It's a beautiful device, and how you use it, the tactile feel of the keyboard, all that kind of stuff goes into the actual product itself. But it comes with all the conveniences, Windows Hello, both from a security standpoint, helpful, but more from that user experience. I open it, I sign in essentially with my face, as I go about my day. As I mentioned, when you think about the quietest room on earth, what that does in terms of teams and collaboration spaces, best example I can give, our fearless leader, Sil, of our sales team, he's the biggest stickler for identifying somebody that's trying to use the speakerphone and microphone off their laptop device when they're in a meeting. Doesn't matter if it's customer facing meeting, it's good, put on a headset. I can hear your background noise, it sounds terrible. The only person he hasn't done that with is me or colleagues that have had Surface hardware, because you don't hear those sounds. You don't hear the fan whirring in the background because of some of that R&D that's gone to it. And while it sounded great in concept until I actually used it, and I witnessed people like Sil not commenting whenever I'm sitting there at speakerphone in my home office or in other settings, those noises aren't picked up and I sound crystal clear. I was with a colleague last week on a call who tried to do that with another piece of hardware. Literally, I had to stop him 5 minutes in, going, "Look, I just can't hear you. Can you put a headset on?" And luckily in my world, I haven't had to do that for years now. So there really is something to the technology in terms of audio quality and clarity that provides, which really does improve our collaborative use of the technology, which is at the utmost importance these days as we build our hybrid work strategies. So, broad scope, when we think of the buckets of where Surface technology helps drive value, these are the big categories that Microsoft identified. Really, I've already been talking about the productivity component. The big two I want to focus on today in a little bit more depth are around sort of the simpler IT process, which many of you folks would be intimately involved in, and the security elements towards where Surface hardware is a differentiator, for example. But when I talk about simpler IT process, I think another piece to call out is it's not just Surface in that case. It's more about, which some of you might have seen other presentations I've given around modern management as a concept. That same sort of thought process really does apply there as well. But I'm going to touch on security here first. And I'm going to pause, actually. I've been doing a lot of talking, and I forgot to mention at the start, we have allocated a little extra time in the slides, so I'm not going to bring you all the way to 11:30 with no chance to talk. But I'm also totally open to interaction. So if you want to throw any notes into meeting chat or come off mute and jump in and ask a question or add a comment, feel free and jump in and make this interactive as well. So before I keep going, any thoughts, questions so far from what I've been talking about? Okay, well, all good. Feel free and do it if you want to. One of the buzzwords that Microsoft uses that kind of resonates is the concept of chip to cloud security, and really designing a solution that starts with the chips and the components on the device all the way through to the back-end management and cloud components. When we think of why that really matters, firmware defense is the big term that you're going to hear about. This shows you a great example timeline. It started around 2018, where we all went, oh my God, we've never thought about how we manage firmware updates to the device fleet, that we deployed out in the field. A lot of us reacted in a panic, tried to figure out how we push tools to it. And the most scary thing of all, as even our internal IT teams for managed clients have faced, is pushing out a firmware update is one of those things you could do that could break a device and you can't get back in and you can't support it remotely. So this kind of became a big deal. A lot of time and energy went into how do we apply firmware update management to our devices. We all got pretty good at patch management and the basics, or at least hopefully we did, in terms of minimizing vulnerabilities. Firmware was always a piece that was harder to address. And you can see that, the rampant timeline that really started 2018 through into 2020 and beyond, where people are targeting the physical device vulnerabilities. So, when we do think security, I didn't want to bore you with tons of stats and numbers, but I think it is relevant to think about it. It's not just an IT problem. It is broader than that. When an issue happens, this affects the C-suite. It affects the HR teams in terms of cost of downtime or productivity. And worse than that, you get into some of the legal challenges, right? So this isn't something we can ignore or pretend isn't a problem anymore. So, when we bring it back to the device, if I look at this slide and, find my little laser pointer here, everybody's pretty good in terms of manufacturers around the hardware. Any enterprise org that we talk to is generally looking at a device that supports TPM, these days TPM 2.0, BitLocker or other disk encryption technologies. Many of them are also, Windows Hello compatible from a camera standpoint, for example. The other buckets, if I skip over firmware for a sec, operating system, same thing we've been talking about, leveraging how we deploy the operating system, why we've imaged in the past has all been around hardening of the operating system, making sure we have the ability to patch it. You can see sort of the other technology components that make this up below. And then obviously where I'll sort of finish the dialogue after security, which is really around the modern management principle of cloud-based management, leveraging tools that enable us to better support our workforce that could be anywhere these days. The really kind of exclusive or unique piece where Surface has done a phenomenal job is really integrating the firmware components. The fact that under that same modern management cloud tools that I have, I can do UFI Surface BIOS management. I can decide that on these particular devices that are already deployed in the field, well, they're going to a customer site that they can't have their cameras enabled. So I will remotely go and control and shut off their cameras. On top of that, obviously, integrating firmware update management, where it really feels more like just Windows updates. It's not that big terrifying task of running some OEM tools on a device that pushes a firmware update that suddenly the user's sitting there watching that screen and potentially breaking it on the way by, increasing our support calls, all that kind of thing. So my confidence in leveraging firmware updates through Surface device management have really helped, has really gone up seeing it in action. So, then we switch gears a little bit to think about simpler IT process. The security elements tie into that and making sure that we can trust the devices as we go on. As we do that, I'm just going to switch cameras and layout here. Hopefully you can still see me. And I'm just going to take control on the Surface Hub, which I'm lucky enough to get to borrow and shove in my office for sessions like today. I'll just turn off presenter mode. This kind of helps show you a little bit of how we can think of people online like yourselves are seeing content, and how I can really target and use the technology in a meeting space or in an office setting to make it a little bit more interactive in what we do. So switching gears from one machine to the other to start sharing content kind of helps illustrate that a little bit. So as we dive into talking around why is it simpler IT process, it starts with the technology and the tools that we look at laying out. In the Microsoft realm today, we really talk about the shift to Microsoft Endpoint Manager. For a long time there was press around, well, is SCCM dead or Configuration Manager? The answer was really no from Microsoft. And they really just rebranded Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is a makeup of Intune, the cloud-based component, a config manager, and potentially integrating even other tools if you have to support Mac fleets or other things like that, for example. But in many client environments, we are actually finding we can go cloud native, and we don't need config manager, or what's now known as MECM. We can just live in that Intune component, cloud native. And it's a real mental shift for organizations as we do so. Talking to IT teams in terms of how we've delivered things for years and years, even staff that we bring on the level 1 help desk, day one, we have to change their mindset. They go straight to, I need to make a change on 50 or 100 or 1,000 machines. I'm going to do that through group policy. Well, Microserve's internal fleet for the last 3-4 years now, no, more than 4 years, are cloud native. We do not join them on-prem Active Directory anymore. And that means we cannot actually use group policies and on-premise Active Directory to do the things that we used to do. So it is a mind shift that we all need to sort of overcome as we look at implementing the technology. Obviously, Microserve, we're here to help. We've got an EUC team that this is all they live, eat, sleep, and breathe these days is modern management projects, is shifting people into using the technology, migrating away or introducing co-management for config manager environments so that they can get some of that cloud native functionality and benefit it over time. But think of the old legacy group policies have now shifted to things like Intune configuration settings and configuration profiles. So how we do it changes. And the beauty of that now really means we're free from on-premise networks, on-premise policies getting applied to a device or figuring out how to publish those securely to the internet. When we're cloud native, we already have that. And I'd encourage pretty much every organization to figure out when it comes to endpoints, how to get away from group policies, the stuff we're doing on premise, and start shifting that. Happy to dive deeper and have some of those conversations as well. So, really, I'm reiterating some of what I already talked about, forgetting which slides I had coming up. Cloud-powered manageability is that fundamental layer. So even if we're still leveraging on-premise Active Directory, which for most orgs will not just go away overnight, is switching to the cloud management component. Really, when we think of zero trust security, we got to trust that device every time it goes to access a resource. We got to trust that user. Everybody thinks of multi-factor today. Not everybody is thinking about, do I really trust that device when it comes in, logs into my environment, and making sure that the right settings and controls are being applied no matter where it is. One of the cool parts, before I dive into talking about Autopilot and some of the more detailed components, when we start mindset shifting and the value that our endpoint EUC teams in our organizations can create now, is our focus shifts. We're not just talking about which update do I approve this month and how are we going to apply this, and the next Windows feature upgrade. Okay, we need to push it out. It can't connect to these machines. All the stuff that we, as IT support teams, have been burning time and energy since, really the last 30 years, since the evolution of devices that go in organizations' hands. So when we think of tools like Endpoint Analytics, you've seen the screenshot on the screen, is shifting our concept of thinking about where our time goes. Wouldn't it be better to be looking at stats like this? How reliable are all my apps in my environment? How fast are machines booting up? Are the hardware resources performing well enough? Am I seeing trending data with particular models or devices? The beauty as we get good at that is we're not wasting all our time on some of the basics we don't need to do. We're focused on proactively improving the environment and doing so with minimal effort. Where you take Endpoint Analytics, you go even further to proactive remediation. So you go, if I notice this and this app is crashing, well, I know a fix. I can actually, if we detect this behavior, we're going to automatically apply a fix through a script or pushing something out to that machine. So the power kind of becomes infinite. The simple solutions you started seeing or that you could Google for would be low disk space warnings, throwing a nice toast pop-up to an end user and saying, hey, it's automatically solving the fact your C drive got really, really full. And it's going through your temp files and it's going to clean it up for you. Simple example, but that list kind of goes on in the possibilities as endpoint analytics and project remediations continue to evolve. But if you ask me, this is where our time needs to go as IT teams. It's not on building the next image for the next version of Windows or how we push out patches, for example. And I'll pause there. Are there any thoughts or questions on that topic before I go a little bit deeper? Just gotta look at my screen here too. Okay. So what I wanted to be able to illustrate, because not everybody has seen it yet, it's becoming more and more in demand as we are starting to shift and we're starting to invest in the tools around endpoint management. It's really talking about zero-touch deployment, Windows Autopilot, how does it work? And so I've got a series of slides, thanks to Microsoft, that walk us through that process in a bit more depth. So if we think of, really high level though, first and foremost, how have we always done it? I've written, a couple different articles talking about, the craziness of what is like Windows endpoint management for so many years. We take this device that comes from a manufacturer and it comes with an OS and apps and all that stuff on it. Well, we don't trust that OS or those apps, so we brick it. We wipe off the whole operating system, start with a clean slate, and then we do what we see here, right? We go through and we say we're going to build that custom image. So every single device piece of hardware that comes into our environment, more than one, okay, this magnifies in terms of effort. We figure out, do we have the right drivers? Do we have all the right settings applying to this device or to this user persona? This device is going to, the engineering staff versus a marketing team, for example, or whatever that might be. Do we have the right policies getting applied? And then most importantly out of all that, do we have the right apps coming down to it? And years ago, we talked about how do we streamline that process, but it was all starting with the custom image component, which means tons of effort on going all to that thought process of I need to wipe my device and reload the OS. Think about doing that with their iPhones. You'd think we'd be crazy if we said, I'm going to start by wiping off the Apple OS on it, and I'm going to start fresh with my own version of that Apple OS and starting all over again. But we've been doing this for years inside of the Microsoft realm. Worse than that, as we think about it, deployment to every device, really the big thing here is you need to touch it. You need that physical access component. And that's the part that's really hurt with traditional Windows deployment. So, screen shifts here. How does that differ when we look at modern Windows deployment? Similar concept, the end result is almost the same, but it's about the time savings that we get. Now we talk about the term deployment profile. So now what we're doing is that same, when you translate the old school imaging process to the concept of autopilot deployment profiles, same kind of components as you can see in here are all still the same, but how we deliver them changes. The best part of that delivery is that I never have to see or touch those devices. If I, caveat being, you need to, on those devices, pre-enroll the hardware ID, or hardware hash specific to every device that we get from a supplier. As long as we get that pre-registered in Intune, when that device gets deployed, all the same stuff that used to get through imaging happens virtually or over the wire. We can apply the right policies. We can strip out Candy Crush. We can make sure that security policies are being applied to deploy your endpoint security tools, to BitLocker drive encryption. All of those components get streamed down to that machine. You never have to touch it. And the beauty is, as we work on this, sure, apps might change, drivers might change. We do that once centrally. We're not building a new image, testing that new image. The new machines get it, kind of left the old fleet behind. That whole world of the iterations of image management that we've done for years and years. So we think about a little bit deeper. If we said, what's the life cycle if we brought Surface Fleet into our environment? First question is, okay, you decide you're going to invest in going down the surface management path, leveraging Autopilot behind the scenes. So then, this is where we can help come in. We can have that dialogue to figure out where you're at in a modern management journey. Maybe you're already there and we just need to look at the device and the hardware and what we're going to apply to a machine. Or maybe it's looking ground zero. How do we actually look at transforming and evolving your MECM type environment or SCCM environment to a modern cloud-based approach? So once we have kind of made that commitment and set up the tools to do it, well, that Surface hardware in this case, we order it from the factory. We get that hardware hash enrolled. the device goes straight to the end user. In the simplest form. I'm going to explain another scenario after as well. And then the beauty really comes down to those config profiles that we've applied and worked together to create. We've started to create that user persona. What do people in the sales team need? What does HR need? And then ironically, the ones where even my tech teams end up inevitably spending lots of time, because I want to make it easier for my life when I reimage or wipe my device. I'm going to load all those IT admin apps that I need and build it in, so a brand new device from factory comes out with all of the tools, settings, config profiles that I need on that device. And so this really ends up happening any point in the process. We can administratively control this and have these pushed out as new devices get provisioned. So whatever in this, in this scenario, there you go. Then the user gets that new device straight from the factory, logs in for the first time. Right as soon as she signs in, her profile loads. The policies, the applications all start self-installing. So that is one key piece to remember here, though, as all of that sales persona goes down on the device, is that can take some time. So if there's a heavy suite of apps that get deployed, for example, in certain personas, well, they might be waiting there a little while before that device is 100% functional. It'll still get there, and this is still a heck of a lot easier than shipping it to your IT team first, waiting for somebody to be freed up enough to load an image, get it all set up for the sales persona in this case, and then get it deployed. So you still save a lot, but the end user potentially is less productive on the new machine as well as they could be. So to finish this scenario, though, before I talk about where it can go next, is thinking about, well, what happens if that user leaves the organization? Well, same thing remotely. What do we commonly do? We'll ship me back the machine. We'll wipe it. We'll re-image it. We'll set it all up for the next user, assuming it's still a current device that needs to get deployed. In our case, thanks to Autopilot, we can just go in there and do an Autopilot reset. We can apply to that machine. We can essentially just do the equivalent of a wipe. It resets up Autopilot, still joined to your organization, still set up with all the right policies getting applied. And then that piece of hardware can go straight to the next user. And as you see the shift, Raul is the next guy that takes over that device when he signs in. Well, in this case, he's an IT user. Now his apps and settings for that persona get applied down to his machine. And then lastly, at the end of its device lifecycle, that device gets deprovisioned as it leaves the org, which means it's not just an Autopilot reset, but essentially wiping off the drive and making sure we've got proof that it's ready for decommissioning, whether it's recycling, donation for computers to schools, or whatever the avenue might be. So this pitch is going to help summarize that end-to-end process in one view of kind of the journey an organization can take. This journey, though, I will caveat, it's laid out for the lifecycle of service. This is the same lifecycle of any device you're going to deploy through modern management principles. So Autopilot is not surface specific. However, some of those components that I mentioned around firmware defense are specific to the surface and what we can do leveraging the tools in that case. So one thing I did mention was when you need to do a faster deployment, you want to make sure users are impacted, or you're really doing this at scale, we need to change the thought process a little bit. Maybe it's not okay for every user to wait 2-3 hours. Maybe it's only a half hour for all the apps and settings to stream down to that new machine when they unpackage it and deploy it, at their home office, for example. So the change here is really we're introducing, what Microserve's bread and butter has been for many, many years, is we run tech centers out of Victoria, Burnaby, Edmonton, and Calgary are our core sites, where in our tech centers, we're not only warehousing and staging the equipment to help mitigate supply chain concerns, but we then can, on your orders and requests, take that next fleet of machines. We can put them up on our tech center config benches. And instead of doing what we used to do, which is pre-imaging a device, which was very complex, often mean network connectivity into the client network, a server there, all sorts of security approval processes to implement. Now we just need internet. But what we go through is what's called a white glove pre-provisioning process. So, the Microservian superhero here takes that fleet of machines, goes through, you hit start button 5 times. It goes through the early stages of Autopilot and gets the device all set up for that user, so that it's waiting on our bench, not at the end user's location when they go to provision it. And of course, that's the key message. Ready to go much faster, really can help provide the value there. And it can be integrated into our processes when Microserve is helping you through your entire end-to-end deployment and provisioning process. So one last thing, how are we doing for time? We're still good on time. Now, before I switch gears, so that was intro to Autopilot. Many of you might have heard or seen or read some of that. Any questions there or thoughts or comments? Okay, well, feel free and interrupt me as I switch gears a little bit. Kind of one of the last elements I wanted to show you, I've talked towards some of the things that differentiate when it comes to Surface hardware. So integrated into the Intune console is essentially the Surface management portal. And it's literally sitting in the same console. You're doing all the stuff around Autopilot provisioning, where your app packages are getting built and deployed in, all centered around the same pane of glass and tools. So I've just got a couple of slides in terms of where this goes. The value being one pane of glass, one management experience, gives you self-serve back towards the data you need, all with that aim of what we're all trying to achieve. How do we do more with less? And we can't just keep hiring more people. There's a cost to that. How we use them and where their time goes really, really does matter. So leveraging these tools can help simplify that process. At a 50,000 foot view, this gives you just a snapshot of what the tool looks like. That again is right integrated in the Intune console. For those of you without Surface, it sits there, nothing in it today. So this screenshot kind of helps tell you what's the makeup of all my devices in the environment. Where do I have any concern? Do I have support requests going through with Microsoft, for example, and give you that end-to-end real estate view under one console without going anywhere else for a separate tool to look at some of that data. If we dive a little bit deeper here, all devices view, your inventory view. A snapshot of compliance, though, you can see integrated. So if you get into Intune device compliance, and then even towards zero trust strategy, maybe you go one step further where I have to have a compliant device to get into my environment. Well, if Renata called in, said I can't log into the network for some reason, I can't get into Teams, one look at here, I would be going, okay, well, it's because you're not compliant. Let's go look at your device and figure out why, and then address that scenario firsthand. More importantly, you can, my favorite piece to this is simply exporting. I want to pull this data out. I want to analyze the information in it. I want to figure out to help inform my next decision on device hardware, or my next acquisition I need to make for hardware refresh, for example. But the beauty here is also, that logic that goes into planning your refresh or warranty coverage is having that data at your fingertips. Ironically, in Microserve, we subscribe to a third-party tool, a SaaS product, to help gather warranty information from our clients' fleets. Because not everybody has that. It's not always accurate. And integrating with every manufacturer is a challenge. So it is really nice to go, I don't need those tools if it comes to Microsoft Surface hardware. If we're leveraging Intune, I know we can get that data. We can identify warranty expired devices, talk about whether we need to address them, and really provide the insight we need to help make better decisions. Also, I mentioned earlier on the homepage or the dashboard is that ability to look at the support activity going on, that if you're engaging with Microsoft for device and hardware support, that those tickets, those support requests coming into the console, you can also get visibility as well. And then kind of wrapping up the content component here is really a snapshot of the whole Surface portfolio. I really didn't want to sit here and just give you the speeds and feeds of every one of the makes and models through our the Surface hardware portfolio. But this is my favorite one-pager, gives you every make and model. The one I've been really excited about personally is looking at the Laptop Studio as potentially my next device. I've been living on the Pro 7 Plus for the last couple of years. Studio is really cool because now I've dedicated GPU in my mobile device as well. So that's high level of the product line. As I mentioned at the start of this, and for those of you that might have joined a little bit later, this Surface Modern Workshop
we can bring into your environment and custom tailor it for you. If you do want to dive on some of the product components, we can partner with Microsoft. We can pull them into the room. What you're not seeing is the 300 hidden slides on all of the gory detail in terms of product, talking broader device strategy or how do you go about integrating this into your environment. More than happy to do the equivalent session, but bring it for you, customized for your environment to have a deeper dive discussion. So with that, I love our partnership with Microsoft and getting to be here today and talk through some of those scenarios. We were early adopters of a lot of the modern management concepts, both within our portfolio in-house and our IT departments, as we're beyond 500 users now. But we've also helped early adopt with many of our clients. I'd really say 2022 has been the year where many organizations are going, we are going to change that. This is part of our hybrid work strategy. We now need to come in here and cross solutions together. I'd love to have a conversation with any of your organizations to help figure out how we can help you achieve just that. Further than that, within my portfolio, we run the managed services team. So maybe you just want to get rid of the headache altogether. We can also have those discussions about how can we take on endpoint management. Many larger orgs, maybe it's not the entire gamut. You're going to have your own security teams, but can we help you evolve and leverage the tools? And we can take on things like app packaging, update management, making sure the updates and feature updates are happening, compliance reporting. There's elements we can provide to big or small organizations there, and more than happy to help enable those discussions. So with that, I'll turn it over and see if we have any more questions. So I'm going to switch cameras and just go back to sitting down at my desk here. And hopefully you still see me. So that's all we had. Like I mentioned, I wanted to keep it not crazy slide heavy today, but give you a good taste of my view anyways, or Microserve's view on the value proposition Surface Hardware has. More so than that, the broader message in terms of where modern management takes us, to me, I think is as essential as hybrid work's not going anywhere. And if we're still managing desktops like we did 5-10 years ago, if that word image is still hitting your teams, love to help have that conversation in terms of how we evolve your organizations.
If I can.
Yeah. Hi, Eric.
Anna signs in first time to her new Surface. Is that Surface joined to my domain already?
You're hitting a major design topic when you look at Autopilot. Maybe would be the answer. It depends on your strategy. The first question is, does it need to be? A lot of people assume it has to be, but if you're really diving into modern management, like Microserve has not joined a device or an endpoint to our on-prem Active Directory domain in 4 years. So in our case, no, which makes building an Autopilot deployment process super easy. But if you have apps that still tie to device-based authentication, or one of the most common ones that we see are the reasons why you cannot do Azure AD native join and still require hybrid or on-prem domain join as well. Usually are things like Wi-Fi authentication. Well, now you need to work with your network teams on changing how you authenticate before, as a prerequisite to going Azure AD native. But in other organizations, we worked with one of our enterprise public sector clients about a year ago. They are now doing Autopilot. They still require on-prem AD join. Anna's got that same experience, and yes, it's on-prem AD joined. But we're looking at always on VPN as a component of the solution to make that happen. So as soon as you need access to on-prem AD, you need a way to get there. And that's where always on VPN, for example, becomes kind of a prerequisite to make this end-to-end solution work. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you bet. Any follow-on question tied to that, or how do you see that apply in your context?
Not immediately.
Okay, no worries. That's a great question, though, because that is one of the challenges, or especially the big UER really have to overcome is how do we change our tooling, which might go outside of the endpoint suite, Wi-Fi, your network teams, your VPN and security teams. This is a dialogue you need to have and kind of workshop out with all of those teams. But I would certainly encourage, if you're not there yet, figure out how you cut the ties to on-prem AD. Because that's where really your cost savings and time savings value comes about. And I'm not talking about 100%. Most clients, you still got many servers in your environment. Those are still on-prem AD joined. That's a whole different topic and talk track. But when you think the desktop, the endpoint, does it need to be? 9 times out of 10 in most of the client dialogues we have, the answer is really no. And maybe there's just 1 or 2 of these prereqs we need to work through and integrate into a project, for example. Okay. Anybody else have thoughts or questions to share with us? We've got about 10 minutes left here.
Hi, Nigel. Is the warranty information in Intune? Is it only for Surface devices?
Or... That's a great question. Unfortunately, yes. It is only for Surface devices at this point. Maybe time will tell as the other OEMs integrate. But today, what you saw on that screen is one of those unique pieces that only apply to the Microsoft Surface fleet.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
On one of the slides, one of the recent ones, the screenshot from the reporting tool, I've noticed Mac OS, iOS, and so on. So is this something also manageable? Yes.
Yeah, and that's a key one I didn't dive deep into, but absolutely, there's been an evolution. One of my slide decks from a year or 2 ago, I would have had a slide talking about the evolution of endpoint management tools. What we used to have, you'd have MDM solutions, which, as you're illustrating, iOS, Android, often Mac live in an MDM tool. And then we had a separate endpoint management, more of a traditional tool. Most commonly SCCM, but there are others that are there as well. The shift to it, the terminology change has really been to UEM, or Unified Endpoint Management, to say, I got one tool that can do it all. Doesn't mean you have to, but when we do an entire end-to-end modern management deploy within a client, we're looking at all those elements, yes. So iOS, macOS, Android, you're limited by the device or whatever you're talking about. macOS is improving under Intune, but it's still, if you're a big Mac shop, Jamf, for example, would be a big name you hear. Jamf can still provision devices and apply more of the automation better than Intune can natively. It's got better control, better integration into macOS. However, Jamf integrates into Intune. So in that one slide I had on the 3 tools, I won't try and find it right now. The other endpoint management might be specific to your environment. A heavy Mac shop, for example, you might integrate and bolt on. So you still get some of the value of the provisioning deployment process on a Mac that actually starts through Autopilot, but Intune is going to kick it over, and a lot of the policy management deploy is going to come from Jamf, for example. So depending on how deep you need to go. At a higher level, though, for many organizations, that comes into conversations about personal devices or BYOD, for example. And that policy control-wise, we know it's a Mac. We can manage elements of a Mac, make sure it's on a particular OS if you're going to connect to your environment. Just some of the deeper management, you're not necessarily going to have out of Intune or Mac specifically. Yeah, you bet. Okay. We got time for another couple of questions here, if anybody has anything. If not, I'm seeing Nika post in here. We just had in the chat forum, you'll see a link to the survey there. love to get your feedback. I love spending time with as many people as I can in calls like this, but also would love the feedback in terms of how can I improve? What tech areas should we focus on? I'd love to spin up another event next month or whatever it might be. So yeah, your feedback goes a long way to help driving what kind of content we try and create for you. So yeah, I'd love your feedback. Encourage you to click that link and share with us.
Hey, Nigel, it's Gregos.
Yeah.
Oh,
hey, Gregos.
I was just thinking at the beginning you mentioned that obviously we organizations move to the hybrid mode of working remotely, and we have to be ready for it. Do you think that manufacturers are kind of behind the ball with hardware, because 99% of laptops out there have low resolution video camera? Many of them, a majority of them, will not support face recognition Windows Hello. And even Apple, of all companies, didn't have high resolution camera in the laptop up until this year. This is the first time they added the high def. But at the same time, the main topic when talking to the customers is their feedback that, oh, audio wasn't great, video wasn't great. So that's not only the camera, but also it's going to push the boundaries to the network, how good the network is, right?
Yeah.
Licensing, there's lots of to it, and OS and everything. But I think truly the hardware is sort of behind what people would expect in 2022. I don't know. What do you think?
I would be careful on that one because we sell all the big tier ones, right? But my honest answer is no. I think you are right. I think it's why Microsoft decided. They were not a hardware company, but they weren't seeing enough movement from OEMs in terms of innovation and where technology could or should go. And a lot of people were hung up on price points, for example, which drove what type of camera ended up on your core fleet of hardware. So that's, I think, a little bit where Microsoft tried to step up and prove to people you can create a premium device that might come with a premium price tag and won't be as cheap as other models, but the experience is different, right? And you hit the nail on the head, right? Other manufacturers, like I said, you're trying to use the speaker and the built-in camera and the microphone built in your laptop. It's terrible, There's no other better way to put it, right? And historically, that's always what I've done. I've plugged in. I've got on my desk here, Jabra speaker pack, or just the headsets or something like that that helped improve the audio quality. Or I've got a Logitech Brio webcam here. The one I'm on right now is the Poly P15 tied to my Teams room. Yeah, peripherals were a big deal, and that's they had to supplement, but it didn't come in the price tag of your default laptop. And then I think further to that, in terms of manageability, the tools are still evolving. Not all the manufacturers could leverage Windows updates for drivers management. Not everybody does. I think we'll continue to see that shift. A lot of orgs are waking up and the OEMs are evolving, but they were a little slow to adopt and move forward with it. No, it's a good comment there, Gregos.
Thank you.
Mike put in a great post around an article about two-in-one laptop is dead. Long live the detachable. So you want some more reading following this? That sounds like an interesting topic for sure. And glad to have you here, Micah. He's our channel partner helper around all things Surface. So here for support as well. Now we're almost at the top of the hour. I can take maybe one more question or comment if anybody has anything else to add. And if there's nothing else, I see we have our attendee count dropping a little bit here. Really appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for joining today. I'd love to go deeper on any topics of interest. If you're a little shy with the big audience we have here, by all means, reach out to your account manager. If you don't know, you can email me direct, nigelb@microserve.ca.
more than happy to dive deeper or answer anything that comes to mind after today.